The quest for solitude, whether it be for the space of an hour or a lifetime, has been a part of nearly everyone's experience. And although few are drawn to it as a permanent way of life, there has been a sufficient number to attract the interest of the historian, as well as the serious student of religion. Nearly all solitaries have fled the world in order to seek a higher and fuller life away from the tumult of the crowd. The chains of the world weigh heavily on them. What do we want most to dwell near to? Wrote Henry David Thoreau in Walden. Not too many men surely, the depot, the post office, the bar room, the meeting house, but to the perennial source of our life. One of these solitaries, who would undoubtedly have remained obscure if it were not for a slim volume of his writings, was Yoshida Kenko, a Japanese court official and nobleman who renounced a life of luxury and ease for one of frugality and simplicity. And although he was born nearly 700 years ago, his thoughts and expressions create a sense of timelessness which serves to bridge the distance of the centuries. The story of Kenko the monk is so typically Japanese in its subtle intertwining of irony, quiet wisdom, and reflectiveness that one is tempted to regard it as a tale of fiction. But the character of this 14th-century Buddhist monk possesses that noble and enduring quality, which at once reassures us that though such men are indeed rare, they are true. And, as history has shown, their worthiness is often communicated to us through their writings. In the case of Kenko these are few. But those we do have display a depth of insight and beauty of expression, which cannot fail in some measure to touch all those who sincerely search, as he did, for inner peace and joy. Yoshida Kenko was born in the year 1283 in a small village near Kyoto, Japan. He died in the spring of 1350 at the age of 68. He spent more than half his life until the age of 42 among the world of men as a nobleman and court official. Grief over the emperor's death severed Kenko's link with a world of pomp and wealth, and drew him for the remainder of his days to the life of a simple hermit and monk. He loved solitude. After he had made up his mind to leave the world, he determined not to choose the communal life of a monastery, but a small house in the wilds of Arashiyama, some distance from the busy rush of Kyoto. Near his hut still runs a narrow river, which hurls itself down upon the quiet valley below, winding through deep gorge carpeted with bristling pines. Even now the place is described as intimate and natural, and must have been more so during Kenko's time. Those who have chosen to spend their lives alone invariably select places like Arashiyama. It is the companionship of trees, streams, birds, flowers and not men that they seek. These become their companions and sustainers. As one of them, a Zen monk, wrote long ago, "The wind gives to me enough of fallen leaves to make a fire." Not all of Kenko's days were spent alone. Occasionally he would visit some old friend in Kyoto, but his persistent yearning for the contemplative life would invariably lead him back to his little hut. To live devoted to the Lord Buddha in the mountain solitudes is never wearisome, he wrote on one occasion, and it drives away the clouds from the thoughts, leaving them clear and serene. A decided advantage of the solitary life is its removal from any externally imposed routine. One more or less lives and works as one pleases. In this regard, Kenko proved no exception, particularly where his writing was concerned. Inspiration ruled his creative efforts. When an idea or memory came to him, he simply wrote it down on a scrap of paper, stuck it to the wall of his hut, and then promptly forgot about any further writing until another flash set him going again. Many years after his death a friend collected these scraps of paper and had them published, at which time they became known as the Tejura Zuragusa. They were soon treasured by cultured Japanese for their mixture of delicate beauty and sound wisdom, and have persisted in popularity to this day. Individuals like Kenko, who have chosen to flee the embrace of society to live by themselves, usually arouse in others a mixed reaction of curiosity and antipathy. For although people have always been vaguely fascinated by hermits, anchorites, and the like, they have also generally resented the fact that such men should find the company of others so unnecessary. Even if such a reaction is immature, it is an understandable one. For by choosing to withdraw from society, the solitary is, in effect, saying, "I'm sorry, but what you offer is not enough." I want something more. Of course, there is the very strong chance that the something more will not be enough either. He might easily go mad or become an incurable egocentric. The approbation of society provides most men with sufficient self-confidence and encouragement to lead reasonably happy, useful lives. In addition, such approval gives us a valuable measure of our own character. Thus, we are less likely to become antisocial or grow destructive personalities. But the solitary, driven to this extreme way of life by an overpowering desire to insulate himself from the rush of men, is thoroughly prepared to forsake these supports. Still, he must be prepared for many battles within. The peace of isolation can be quickly broken by the intrusion of irrelevant notions or disturbing distractions and obsessions, all of them upsetting to the mind. By renouncing diversion, the solitary also renounces the protective wall he has for years constructed around the inner recesses of his mind. Like angry devils suddenly released from captivity, thoughts long buried fly out to haunt and torment him, and he is forced at last to confront the inconsistent and incomprehensible things of life, instead of simply ignoring them. But all these struggles are willingly faced by the solitary if he is convinced that behind the world he has forsaken lie only temporal happiness and passing joys, and that in the apparently barren life he has adopted, there is the seed of a lasting and eternal joy which will one day germinate. One of these men, an anonymous Christian recluse, makes good his point when he writes, "In the midst of a civilization visibly crumbling away before us, the vision of men and women going apart into solitude for the quest still goes on silently, yet stridently bears witness to the reality of the unseen, to the lordship of mind over matter, to the supremacy in man of the spirit. It trumpets abroad the tremendous question: what exchange shall a man give for his soul?" Although we cannot with any certainty attach a religious motive to Thoreau's famous 2-year period of solitude, we can see the characteristics which mark him a true solitary. "I find it wholesome to be alone the greater part of the time," he wrote in Walden. "To be in company, even with the best, is soon wearisome and dissipating. I love to be alone. I never found the companion that was so companionable as solitude. We are for the most part more lonely when we go abroad among men than when we stay in our chambers." Now, we might well ask the question: what enables the solitary to escape the punishments of loneliness? Kenko suggests the reason. If a man should desire the great adventure, he cannot have it both ways, nor can he succeed also in the beloved affairs of the world. Difficult as it may be to bid farewell to duty, he should ruthlessly set it aside. But he argues far otherwise: such and such a thing must be attended to, or people will certainly laugh at me. When I consider the years I spent in arranging such matters, it would be sheer weakness to fly off to some new notion in such hot haste. Well, that is his point of view, but if he accepts it the world strengthens its bonds, and preoccupations crowd in upon him in endless procession, and the moment of relinquishment will never arrive. What does this tell us? That if we wish a higher life, we must eventually abandon the vain pleasures of the world and the attachments they breed, in short, conquer desire. It is unfulfilled desires which torment the lonely person. The solitary has learned to go beyond them. Desirelessness is the foundation of spiritual life. If we are controlled by something finite, something which has the capacity to cause us pain and distract our minds from higher aspirations, how is it possible to grow in spirit? Naturally, temptations assault everyone. But when man surrenders to an obsessive self-concern, as certainly the lonely are apt to do, he is marked for sorrow. It is desire which nourishes the small self, and it is this self which every aspirant is eventually required to transcend. Of course, Kenko must have been aware that not everyone is suited for monastic life. It takes a particular type of individual to exchange the pleasures and diversities of the world for a life of sameness and simplicity. But at the same time, he was aware there are a number of people who, in the face of problems and woes, attempt to escape them through retreat to the forest or cave. "For my part," he wrote, "if a man drops into the monastic way simply because life has treated him unkindly, I cannot think well of it. I like better those who are glad to choose solitude and to pass their time in such retirement that none seek them anymore. Despite the quiet flow of his life, there is no record that Kenko ever found a single day of it dull or boring. He wrote on one piece of paper. What sort of creatures are they who find life tedious? I cannot understand the drift of such thoughts. Well indeed is the life of him who lives in solitude. If we live according to the world's measure, our hearts move to the rhythm of wealth and reputation. If we must have friendly social relations, how can we insist upon truths which would offend those we meet? We must jest, argue, quarrel, be merry and always amid uncertain conditions. Thoughts flit hither and thither, advantage and disadvantage appear and disappear. The drunkard's dream, inebriate and inebriating, and noisy activity stupefying and lapsing into dullness as age creeps on. And in this all ends. True pleasure lies in extricating oneself from this sort of business, in forsaking human relations, and laying worldly affairs aside. Even if the absolute truth of the universe be too high for understanding, much peace can thus be attained. Kenko's writings reveal another characteristic to mark him as a healthy-minded solitary: his love of beauty. Simply because he looked upon the world as transitory does not mean that he denied its loveliness. On the contrary, he embraced it, but lightly and with dispassion. Note in the following selection how poetically he describes the passing seasons, yet, at the same time, maintaining a respectable distance between himself and the subject. Observe how few references he makes to his feelings or to what the scenes create in him. Only in the final sentence does he intrude. How profound is the interest of the revolving pageant of the seasons. Spring, summer, autumn, and winter encircle us in tongue. The universal feeling is that autumn makes the deepest appeal to sentiment. That is true, but how enchanting is the spring when the singing birds return on a warm spring breeze. How sweet the sunshine. It is a stirring of spring within us to see the grass thickening beneath the fences on a mild misty day, and to watch the early budding of the flowers. Rain and wind follow and disturb our thoughts with pity, until the lengthening leaves break out in green flame upon all the trees. There is a strange fascination in the withered leaves of winter, and in watching their fall at the edge of the brook on a cold morning when the frost rims them with white glitter, and the morning mist rises like breath from the stream. I find all this very lovely. Wisdom is eternal and universal. It is bound by no religion or philosophy, neither does it recognize time or place. We are drawn to the thoughts of this unusual Japanese monk, because the truths expressed in his writings harmonize to some degree with the truth that is in us all in struggles for expression. The egg is the world, and the bird breaks the shell, afterwards, it flies toward God. Wrote Hermann Hesse in his novel Demian. Whether we prefer to regard the world as transitory and unreal, or as a joyful manifestation of his power, we will, sooner or later, have to break its shell and fly to God. This, the wise tell us, is man's ultimate purpose in life. To realize it means constant struggle against not only the impulses of our lower nature, but victory as well over the more subtle, refined temptations of the intellect and ego. We can extend Hesse's simile further. We are bound by 5 shells or sheaths: the physical body, the breath, or vital force, mind, i.e., the mind that receives sense impressions, intellect, and ego. When, one by one, these are pierced through by spiritual effort and God's grace, then he, the Supreme Self, is found, the Atman is revealed, the ever-blissful soul of man. As a way of life, solitude offers small evidence for providing man with a final solution to the problem of existence. In fact, the majority of the world's saints and thinkers have generally lived in close association with other men. And it has some great dangers. By removing himself from society, the solitary escapes any objective or corrective evaluation of his own behavior. In time, the abnormal may appear normal to him, the destructive, harmless. To lead balanced, productive lives, most of us need the reinforcement and love of others. Naturally, there are always exceptions, such as Kenko and Thoreau, and from such exceptions the world has profited. For by their experiment with life, they have been able to pass on to those who would listen some essentials of happiness. Freedom from attachment, simplicity in living, love of nature, and removal from distraction. And somehow we stand in awe of these men who have flung aside honor and wealth to travel an unmarked and lonely road. Selections from Kenko the monk. I engaged in a religious life only for the love of God, and I have endeavored to act only for Him. Whatever becomes of me, whether I be lost or saved, I will always continue to act purely for the love of God. I shall have this good at least, that till death I shall have done all that is in me to love Him. We ought to act with God in the greatest simplicity, speaking to Him frankly and plainly, and imploring His assistance in our affairs, just as they happen. I have often experienced that God never fails to grant it. We should establish ourselves in a sense of God's presence by continually conversing with Him. It is a shameful thing to quit His conversation to think of trifles and fooleries. There is not in the world a kind of life more sweet and delightful than that of a continual conversation with God. Those only can comprehend it who practice and experience it, yet I do not advise you to do it from that motive. It is not pleasure which we ought to seek in this exercise, but let us do it from a principle of love, and because God would have us. I do not advise you to use multiplicity of words in prayer, many words and long discourses being often the occasions of wandering. Hold yourself in prayer before God like a dumb or paralytic beggar at a rich man's gate. That there needed neither art nor science for going to God, but only a heart resolutely determined to apply itself to nothing but Him, or for His sake, and to love Him only. Believe me, count as lost each day you have not used in loving God. That the most excellent method he had found of going to God was that of doing our common business, without any view of pleasing men, and purely for the love of God. In the beginning I had often passed my time appointed for prayer in rejecting wandering thoughts and falling back into them. I could never regulate my devotion by certain methods as some do. At first I had meditated for some time, but afterward that went off, in a manner I could give no account of. Useless thoughts spoil all, the mischief begins there, but we ought to reject them as soon as we perceive their impertinence to the matter in hand, and return to our communion with God. I am more united with God in my outward employments than when I leave them for devotion and retirement. It is a great delusion to think that the times of prayer ought to differ from other times. We are as strictly obliged to adhere to God by action in the time of action as by prayer in the season of prayer. I tell you that all consists in one hearty renunciation of everything which we are sensible does not lead to God. Sometimes I consider myself there as a stone before a carver, whereof he is to make a statue. Presenting myself thus before God, I desire Him to form His perfect image in my soul, and make me entirely like Himself. I am in the hands of God, and He has His own good purpose regarding me, therefore, I trouble not myself for aught that man can do to me. The trust we put in God honors Him much and draws down great graces. You would go faster than grace, but one does not become holy all at once. The greater perfection a soul aspires after, the more dependent it is upon divine grace. God seems to have granted the greatest favors to the greatest sinners, as more signal monuments of His mercy. Ah, did I know that my heart loved not God, this very instant I would pluck it out. I again say, let us enter into ourselves. The time presses, there is no room for delay, our souls are at stake.